can see my screen there, right?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. And sorry, can you see the controls from Zoom as well still? Sometimes people see it. Anyway,
The little bar at the bottom's there, but that should disappear.
yeah, okay, that shouldn't hopefully won't get anyway. So yeah, the topic for today is about connecting the dots, linking preprints to other outputs. I'm going to briefly describe who CrossRef is. I know there's quite a diverse group on these calls. I think that's fantastic. Maybe some of you are not so familiar with CrossRef, so I'll give a short introduction. Talk generally about research outputs and why that's so important to us. Preprint metadata, and then steps that we're taking to connect the dots and put things together. I'm going to raise a lot of questions, not give too many answers, and hopefully that will fuel the discussion later. So this is our mission at CrossRef. It's to make research outputs easy to find, link, assess, and reuse. And hopefully that already points to why linking preprints and other research outputs is important to us, because it's right here in our mission. There's no mention of specific types of outputs, but we tend to focus on text outputs, so articles, books, conference papers, preprints, blogs, posters, all sorts of things. And there is a kind of another not sister organization, but another organization that focuses on things that you typically find in repositories. So that's DataCite, and they focus a lot more on DataCite code and other things. And there's some crossover that I'll talk about later. We're also a DOI registration agency, so our members send us DOIs and metadata about those. We make that available. We are a membership organization and a not-for-profit, and we're here to benefit the whole of the scholarly infrastructure community, scholarly communications community. So we have 20,000 members. It's a very diverse membership. And I think this impacts on how we do a lot of things. And I think diversity within preprints is very important. We have about 150 million metadata records for different research outputs, and about just over 1 million of those are preprint metadata records. All of the metadata that we have is open, publicly available through APIs. We have an amazing team. A few of them are on the call today. We cover 11 different countries and 4 different continents. We're not quite as diverse as our membership, but we're working on it, and it is something that's very important to us to be multilingual, be based in different countries, and really truly global. So I'm going to give you a very brief history lesson. So on the left-hand side here, there's an anagram, and this was sent by Galileo to Kepler many moons ago to describe the discovery by Galileo of rings around Saturn. And he deliberately made it obscure. He sent it to just one person, or maybe a handful of people. And so that if somebody else discovered the same thing, he could say, haha, I got there first. So he was really just communicating the results, and in a very obscure fashion, to just a few people. Fast forward a few hundred years, and societies such as the Royal Society start printing journals. This is also to give credit to the people who made scientific discoveries, and to resolve disputes about precedents and so on. And in the journal articles, you have a description of the results, also a description of the methods, and they're shared a little bit more broadly to a community of scholars who read the journal. Now go forward to maybe 2 or 3 a few decades ago, and the internet comes online, and then it's possible not just to communicate text, but to communicate other forms of output. So now it's possible to, as well as the results, as well as the methods, also communicate the data, also communicate code and images and videos, and there's a lot more diversity here. And also it's now available to, in principle, anyone with an internet connection. And I think it's interesting to think about, okay, what comes next? with this process. And you know, a few ideas which I think preprints are moving in the direction of is, you know, outputs being available in real time, a lot more commentary about outputs, linking the results of research, you know, maybe more closely with policy and practice. And you know, there's lots of things that you could fill in this with this question mark. And one of the ways in which we think about this diversity of outputs and how research outputs are represented is what we call the research nexus. Other organizations talk about maybe a science graph or a knowledge graph. But essentially in the middle of this wheel, and sorry, it may be a little bit too small for some of you to read, but hopefully you can tell from the icons that there are different types of research output. So there's the things I mentioned earlier, articles, books, preprints, and so on, but there's also data, there's blogs, there's people, there's organizations, and these things can have digital identifiers, whether that's just whether that's a URL, whether it's something like an ORCID for a person, a raw identifier for an organization, or a DOI for a preprint. You know, there's a way of identifying these things electronically. And around the outside are different actions that can happen to these outputs, or different ways in which they can be connected. So for example, you can have a grant which is connected, which is provided by an organization to a person, or funds a research article. You can have an author connected to things that they've written. Outputs can be published, they can be republished, they can be edited, remixed, translated. You know, there's more outputs. There's obviously with preprints, there's multiple versions. This list of things that we have here is not exhaustive, but it's kind of indicative of how research outputs connect together and how we think about them. So a couple of challenges with this kind of model. So firstly, if you look at a research output, how can you tell what it is? You know, I did actually Google for a cartoon duck, failed miserably to find something, and came up with my own solution here. And you might say, well, actually, this looks nothing like a duck. It's more like a chick. And I say, well, it's kind of got a duck-shaped, duck-colored beak, and the tail looks a bit like a duck. You're looking at different characteristics of it, and someone else will say, well, this is just a collection of pixels on my screen. This is not a duck. And you can ask the same kind of questions about research outputs. So, and I think with the innovations at the moment around preprints, for example, the lines are blurring a little bit. So you can ask, is a peer-reviewed preprint, does it have the same characteristics as a journal article? Maybe where do you draw that line? The stuff that's published in journals, which is not peer-reviewed, so opinion pieces or editorials, should they be in the same bucket as journal articles, or should they have a different type? Should they be identified differently? And then organizations come to us and they say, well, we have things like a protocol or a blog post or a Jupyter notebook. How can we register our metadata with you? What type attribute should we give it? And this is challenging, and we don't have all of the answers to that yet. But I think we need to ask the question of, you know, what attributes are required to describe this thing? Could you have a preprint that has, you know, maybe a volume and an issue number? Does a journal article have to have those things? But I think the most important question to ask is who is looking for that information? How are they going to find it? And if you have this collection of items that you want someone to find, how are they going to identify them? And another challenge in this space, I think, is fragmentation, especially with preprints. And I think it comes to the core of the topic that we're looking at today. You know, how do things connect together? I see there's a few comments coming in. I'll open the chat and stick it on my other window. Yeah, unless it's something that comes in quickly, I'll kind of look at those at the end, I think. So yeah, you might find that a preprint is deposited on a platform, maybe on multiple platforms. There are different versions of the same preprint. An journal article is likely to be on a different platform to the preprint. There's now, as I think most of us here are very aware, some innovative platforms for reviewing preprints and other outputs. There's data and code, which typically sit on other platforms. So for one piece of work, you may be looking at maybe 7 or 8 different places you need to go to look for those things. How do you know where to look? How can you in an automated way get all of the information that you need about those things? And there's also an issue with preprints, that there are different registration agencies. You know, CrossRef is the largest DOI registration agency. We are by far, you know, not the only one, and you know, there are different reasons that organizations choose different registration agencies. So Research Square, bioRxiv, medRxiv register DOIs and their metadata, and the metadata for preprints with CrossRef. Archive register DOIs with DataCite, and you know, our two databases are different. We have different schemas customized to the information that we collect. Do downstream users know that they need to look in different places? Yeah, and I've mentioned, you know, there can be multiple copies of the same item in different places, and I think with preprints, it's a legitimate question as to whether they are the same thing, and without looking at the content, it's difficult to know. And so I'll just talk briefly about preprint metadata. I think I've mentioned metadata a number of times already. What are we talking about? You know, we're talking about these characteristics of research output. So not the content, the stuff that you would read in the PDF, but how do you describe it? So things like title, authors, abstract, references, dates, and so on. And these are usually represented in computer readable formats or machine readable formats, with a schema, and the schema comprises a field name. So title might be a field name within a schema document, and then there's certain values. So a computer can go along, look through the document. It finds the keyword title. It says, okay, well, now I know where to find the value of that title. And as I mentioned before, you know, CrossRef we have our own schema. DataCite has its own schema. If you go to OpenAir, they have a different schema. OpenAlex has its own schema. Many platforms, you know, that hold information about scholarly research describe data in slightly different ways, customized to their users and the information that they want to store. You know, there are areas of a DataCite schema which is more detailed than ours. Relationships, for example, because data sets have, you know, very complex ways in which they can be related. And you know, there are parts of our schema are more complex than theirs. So this question of interoperability is very live, and you know, can we have one schema to rule them all? There is a Research Data Alliance group which is looking to take different schemas and map them between each other, to see whether, you know, it's possible to transfer at least some of the metadata between different platforms. So I'm going to move on now to preprint matching specifically, and what we do at CrossRef for preprint matching. So this is the current setup that we have. So preprint metadata is deposited by one of our members. Sometime later, an article is deposited, and we look through all of the preprints that have been deposited. If we find an exact match between the two with the first two authors and the title, we say, yep, that's a preprint that's related to this article. And we email the member who deposited the preprint and said, we think this article matches your preprint. They can check that, redeposit the metadata of the preprint to say, yes, these two things are connected. Now, if you stare at this for not very long, and maybe the few seconds I've talked about it already, you'll realize that there are some issues with this. How the title is encoded can just completely throw off the match that we have. If you swap the author order or you spell the author's name differently, that can also lead to a failure to find the match. And emailing people these results is toilsome, it's cumbersome, it's very 1990s, and we know that a lot of our members actually struggle to process these emails, and I sympathize with them about that. So we are looking to change this process, and what I want to talk about today is mainly the white boxes here. That when we receive an article, we'll do a search in our database and just get a few candidates to say, these might be a preprint that matches this article. And then we look at those candidates, we score them in some way, we threshold them, and then we can directly update the metadata record, saying we as CrossRef think that this article matches this preprint. We can inform the preprint member, we can inform the member who deposited the article, and they can say yes or no, and have a feedback mechanism to update those matches if necessary. Dominica, who's on this call from our labs team, has been looking at this and has done some really excellent work to look for and compare different strategies for doing this matching and this scoring. There's a blog post that I can thoroughly recommend. I can put the afterwards I'll put the link in the chat. And so we've compared a few different strategies for linking articles and preprints. One of those is a kind of what we call the heuristic strategy, which calculates a score for the similarity between the titles, the authors, and the date of publication for the candidates and preprint candidates in the article, and then comes up with a score, and we can put some thresholding on that. We've also tried the machine learning approach. At the moment, the machine learning approach isn't outperforming the heuristic approach. I think there's potential to improve there in the future, but at the moment we're looking to implement in our production services this heuristic approach. And maybe just to this image on the left just kind of demonstrates a little bit of how the thresholding works. So we find a score. If it's below the threshold in this gray area, then maybe everything's below the threshold, there's no match. Maybe we get one thing that's above the threshold, yes, that's a match, great, job done. Maybe there's more than one thing that's above the threshold, and if the score for those things is close together, we can say yes, well actually all of those things are matches. So we and we can say that there are multiple matches here, which may be different versions of the same preprint. There may be multiple things that are above the threshold, but some of them are scoring much higher than others, and so we kind of have this local thresholding as well as a kind of overall thresholding. So that's the kind of principles of it. If you're really interested in the details, read Dominica's blog post. More than that, you can find the code. You can try out we have an experimental DOI which you can experimental API that you can use to test matching as well. So briefly, here are the results that we've found so far. So we've managed to find 296,000 matches between preprints and research articles that were already in the database. So the new method was able to detect the majority of these. There were about 15,000 known links, known relationships that we didn't manage to recover. No method is going to be perfect, and we think this is a pretty good number. On top of that, we've managed to find 331,000 matches which were not already known in our database. So this is either where the members they either know about it and they haven't told us yet, they ignored our emails, as I mentioned earlier, which is I sympathize very much, or these were simply not known. And we've been getting very high values for precision, recall, and F scores. So precision is about how many false negatives we have, and the higher number is better. The maximum is 1. So essentially in 1% of cases we're maybe getting a mismatch. Recall is about whether we're finding things that we know are already there, and in about 95% of cases we're able to match the things we already knew about. And then the F score is a combination of the two of those. Again, these are really very good scores. So just a question from Amy about the encoding. So yeah, so some of our title encoding. So some of our members submit titles, for example, with JATS encoding. in the title, or occasionally with something like LaTeX encoding, and that's saved in our database. If you do have this or you don't have this, that can affect, or it could be just simple text, that can affect how the matching works. And we see particularly, for example, with articles that have a chemical name in the title, how you represent a hyphen or an alpha or beta or something can really throw off the matching. Yeah, we've done this. We're quite happy with the results, but we invite you to try and do better. The code is public. There's an API where you can look at what we've done already. We've built the code in a modular way so that we can add different strategies. If you have a all singing, all dancing, AI generated, blockchain supported, buzzword filled strategy that outperforms ours, fantastic. We can add that into our API as well. And there's also the testing of strategies is built into the API. So there's a test set built in that can be run against new strategies, and the results of that testing can also be viewed. So you can see exactly which DOIs are being matched, which ones are not, and where certain strategies have strengths or weaknesses. So yeah, just take a couple of minutes to maybe reflect on where I think we are at the moment in terms of all this. And if you're familiar with the kind of norming, forming, storming process, I think scholarly communication is maybe reforming at the moment, which is why we're seeing fragmentation between platforms and people coming up with different ways of doing scholarly communication. It's not just submit to a journal, wait for peer review, wait for editorial decision, publish. There's a lot of those processes are being mixed up. I think that's a fantastic thing. It means a proliferation in platforms. It means a proliferation in schemas and protocols. It means some head scratching for organizations like us. I think the ways to cope with that are to build communities, to talk to each other about the barriers and issues that some of these innovations throw up. And I think, as I said before, a focus on who needs the information, where are those people, and how can they digest the information that they use. And I think between us, we can find great solutions that will enable us to connect things together. And I guess I should just say, all the matching stuff that I talked about in kind of the second part of my talk doesn't solve at all the problems of multiple platforms that I mentioned in the first part. All the matching that we've done so far is within the CrossRef database, and we are not really in a position to be looking outside of CrossRef at the moment. And I think we need to really work with the community to solve some problems that we have there and that we see. So yeah, thank you very much. I think there's a kind of question time and some further discussion.
Thank you, Martyn. Yes. Lonnie, there's a question in the chat from you if you want to unmute yourself.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. It was really cool. Yeah, one of the questions that I asked here is what's going on at CrossRef to check some of the metadata that you have. So I'm sure you're aware that with Guillaume Cabanach and Cyril Abbé and Alexander Magazinov, we found that some of the journal side pushed metadata about references was potentially manipulated by the journals to inflate citation counts. And I wonder if this, if you plan to implement something, work with us maybe on implementing something to catch these kind of things. And if this, from my understanding, CrossRef can't really ban journals or kind of put a kind of a hammer punishment on them for any kind of dubious acts. But would there be maybe a discussion to be had with COPE or other instances to try and have something a little bit more efficient should this be found other places?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question, and we get asked kind of variations on the same question a great deal. And in the case of these kind of what you call sneaked references, the first question is, was this a deliberate thing? Did it happen accidentally? And there's some investigation to go into there. And I think it's it's something where this community building and us being connected and integrated into the community is really important for us. We would love to be able to deal with and follow up on all of these things. We're a team of 50 with a membership of 20,000. We have limited resources, and I think, as you said, there are organizations and researchers like yourself who are looking at these things using the open metadata that we have and finding errors in the metadata. And I think it's important that we work together to do that. That's not a direct answer to your question. I know that my colleagues are looking into it, and I, that and we have.
Yes, we're in touch with some of the folks from your side, definitely. But I was thinking maybe it is worth, as you as an organization reaching out to COPE about these kind of issues, because this is a new kind of fraud that hasn't been mentioned anywhere, and I think COPE doesn't have a mechanism for dealing with it yet. So maybe, I could reach out to COPE on my side, but I think if you do it as an organization, you have a lot more power to potentially change things. But maybe it's an email to write together. Yeah, and that's it on my side. I don't want to take all the time. Sorry.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I mean, we have a kind of ongoing discussion about what the role of CrossRef should be in research integrity. We've been relatively passive in the past. We haven't banned members unless there's been a legal judgment, for example, against a member, and it's really, really obvious. We haven't acted on suspicions of misconduct, but our attitude has been we make the data open, and the community can look at it.
Michael, you had a question.
Yeah, sorry, probably a long-winded technical one. It's in the chat, mostly just about handling the case where you have multiple preprint DOIs to a single journal article. Will you handle like a kind of many-to-one relationship there?
Yeah, that's fine, and it's actually expected if you have a preprint with maybe 3 or 4 versions, or you get preprints with many more versions. We would hope to capture all of those versions, and sometimes one of those preprints isn't actually shouldn't actually be linked, but typically what we're seeing is that we're finding multiple versions of the same thing, and it's absolutely fine within our schema and within our database to link multiple preprints to a single journal article, and then the journal article will reciprocally be linked back to the preprints as well. So that's not an issue for us to do.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions? I have one.
I have a question. I apologize. I could not find the raised hand symbol. If you don't mind. Is it correct to assume that if I query the article, this is Stephanie Dawson from Science Open, if I query the article at CrossRef, will I get also this relationship information to that this is the article is related to this preprint and vice versa? Is that working now for metadata affiliate?
Yes.
Okay.
There's a slightly tentative answer, because we've had some issues with how the database is constructed, and there can be a lag sometimes with the reverse. If a member, for example, asserts that a preprint is a version of an article, there can be a lag in our database. That means it doesn't immediately show up that the article has the preprint related. But yeah, in principle, that's how it's working.
Okay. Cool.
There's a question from Marcel.
The right mechanisms exist to reach consensus about, for example, new content types. That's a very interesting question, and I'm not sure it's one that I can adequately answer. So I can tell you that we are I think probably the short answer, as far as I am aware, is no, I don't think there is consensus about new content types, and we do not we do not kind of dictate. It goes a little bit back to what Lonnie was saying earlier. We don't dictate to our members what content types they should choose. We let them choose the content type that they think is most appropriate for their data. We'll advise members when they ask us about it. But for example, if you go and look at data sets in our metadata, you will find, you know, posters and news items and all sorts of stuff there, which, you know, probably shouldn't do there. It probably shouldn't be there. We generally take the approach of kind of advising the community on what they should do, rather than saying, okay, this is how it is, this is exactly what you put here, and this is exactly what you put here. So it's one of the challenges of being a membership and a community organization, that we don't feel that it's for us to take the lead on saying, this is what a journal article is, this is what a preprint is, but we will participate in initiatives that, you know, that make that, you know, make those choices and make those decisions.
That's great, Martyn. Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I guess part of what I have in mind there, right, there's both the problem of sort of how to map a particular instance of a poster or paper or whatever onto sort of existing metadata. I guess what I had in mind was more like, you know, the related material type, for instance, and the way that sort of functions as a catch-all for many different types of outputs.
Yeah.
And, you know, is useful for that reason, but also is maybe less granular than might be helpful for other cases. So I'm trying to imagine, yeah, the process of, you know, of mapping something like related material onto more, you know, onto other types of research outputs, and what mechanisms there might be to convene a conversation about how to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not aware, and I'm not the most informed person at CrossRef about this, so I'm not aware of kind of conversations around that. I know that I think that is a NISO group about article definitions, by a little bit vague as to exactly what the content of that is. I would say that what we would like to move to internally, and it's technology which is stopping us at the moment, but is to say, look, you could send us a metadata record, picking whatever fields you need and that you feel are sufficient to describe the item that you have. And then the type is kind of like a cherry on top of the cake. Whereas at the moment, you pick a type and that dictates to you what fields you're allowed to put in. For example, you know, you can't put maybe a bit niche, but you can't put crossmark metadata for a preprint, for example, because that's normally related to published corrections and published retractions. But there could be perfectly valid cases where, you know, that would be a useful thing to do. But rather than, you know, rather than saying up front, you know, you've chosen this type, you can send us this metadata, say, well, send us the metadata and give us your opinion, if you like, on what the type of this thing is.
Eliza? You go on, Eliza.
Yeah, sorry, I can't find where the hand is. I've been looking so quickly. Repositories are, I think, a good reference place for all these new content types and how to classify them, because they typically deal with all different types of content. I think, yeah, it is challenging, but I think it's worth maybe working with those communities to develop a bit of a standard. I think that would be a good place to start. Yeah,
thanks for that. And I know repositories work a lot with DataCite, and you know, DataCite have, if you compare the types that DataCite have and the types that we have, there is some things in our like dataset or posted content that we have which are kind of a catch-all for many things, and there are some things in the DataCite schema like text which are a catch-all for many things, which, you know, we would maybe have more details and for text, and they would maybe have more details for posted content. So yeah, it's there's certainly a lot of opinions out there, and a lot of communities that we can work with to to find these things. But yeah, thanks for the comment.
Shirley also has a question, and whilst you ask your question, Shirley, I'm just going to load up the whiteboards.
Hi, Martyn. Yeah,
Hi.
I can't remember where you're at with the idea, you know, once you've got the preprint DOI linked to the version of record DOI and you've provided that to the publishers and the preprint servers. Are you or will you be also providing notifications if that published version of record is retracted?
So what we will do is make that information available, publicly available through our APIs. We're not at the moment planning to build a kind of a push notification service.
Yeah.
Though there is an initiative that STM Solutions are working on at the moment called the I think CUSAP project, CUSAP. I can't remember what it stands for, and I am on the working group for that, and they're working very closely with us to build a tool that will be able to notify downstream repositories when something has been retracted. We do have Crossmark already, but that's more for kind of individual users, and I think that this STM project is quite interesting in that it's for notifying repositories and organizations. But say our data is open, but we're not necessarily planning to push it push it in that sense to repositories. They would need to kind of come and look for it.
Yeah, got it. Thanks. That's great. Quick follow-up. Can you remind me where the thinking is on improving from the current email that you send to preprint servers with the links? I know that CrossRef has been like looking at something that is more of a push or a elegant solution.
Yeah, so we're building a new version of our database. This has been quite a big undertaking, and it's taken us longer to put that together than we would like to. But we now have an endpoint for our API which is specifically delivers relationships, and so the idea is that preprint members who are depositing preprints or articles could look there to find the most recent updates and the most recent relationships that we've established. We're not pushing that data at the moment. That's the kind of it. So I didn't put any dates on the stuff that I was talking about earlier, but starting next month we'll be working on the implementation of this, and that will carry on this year.
All right, thanks so much. And I really appreciate the work CrossRef does to help us link these different versions together. It's really been central. So thanks.
Thanks, Shirley.